So again, welcome, Dr. Mulvey. We're really excited to have you, and I know we've been talking about this for a while, to have you share about your study and what it is, and how this can help, and why any of us would want to participate to help study the quality of life in NET patients. So go ahead and introduce yourself and welcome. This is just a casual time.
Okay, great. Well, it's nice to meet you all. I'm so happy to be here. As Lisa shared, I'm a thoracic oncologist with a particular interest in lung neuroendocrine tumors and really all neuroendocrine tumors. And I work closely with Emily Bergsland at UCSF. I do have a couple of slides, but I'm really excited to talk a little bit about our pilot study, eNET, which is using a web-based health platform to investigate health-related quality of life for patients with neuroendocrine tumors. So this is the outline of the slides that I'll share today. I'll talk just a little bit about what we know so far about quality of life in NENs. I'll provide some background for why we were interested in doing the eNET study. I'll talk about the design of the study and our goals. I'll share a little bit at the end about the larger study that we're planning down the line, which is tentatively called NET Voices. And then at the end, hopefully we can brainstorm a little bit about how to make the study better for anyone who's already participated and ways we might partner together in the future. All right, so what do we know about quality of life in neuroendocrine neoplasms? Well, there's some emerging data that patients with NENs may have a uniquely high burden of chronic symptoms that impact quality of life. And this is both from the hormones that these cancers can sometimes produce, from tumor bulk, metastasis spreading, and then also from the cumulative side effects from prolonged treatment. So although many people with NENs can live for a good amount of time, the cumulative effects of all the treatment that people get along the way and of prolonged treatment do seem to impact quality of life. This slide shows data from a global survey that was done. It was an anonymous self-reported survey. People filled out the survey questions both online, and then there was also a paper option. It was done as a partnership between INCA, the European support group, and Novartis. And it was a global study. So they recruited almost 2,000 patients with NETs from over 12 countries between February and May 2014. And this is just a snapshot of one of the pieces of data that was generated from that study. So this is responses to the question, how much has each of these areas of your life been negatively affected by your NET? And on the right, you'll see the percentage of people who said that this area had been affected either moderately or a lot. And I think the key take-home point is just that NENs do seem to have a significant impact on a variety of aspects of quality of life, everything from energy to emotional health, finances, ability to care for yourself or your family, and other relationships. This is another study that was done out of Canada. It is a retrospective study of about 2,721 patients. So it looked at people who had been diagnosed with NETs within a specific province in Canada, Ontario. And they assessed symptoms by a standardized scale. So they used the Edmonton Symptom Assessment System, which is a standardized way of measuring quality of life. And you'll see on this slide some data in terms of the number of patients who said that in each of these domains, there was moderate to severe symptoms. So that was defined as an ESAS score of greater than or equal to 4. And you can see that in particular, so fatigue, that's the highest line here, but also well-being and anxiety, that at least 30 to 45% of respondents said that they had moderate to severe symptoms in those 3 domains in particular. So again, it does seem like, and if you look over time, this study was a longitudinal study, so looking from diagnosis onwards, and you can see, especially at diagnosis, there was a fairly high amount of symptoms that people had. It did go down a little bit after diagnosis, but then remained fairly stable over time, maybe starting to uptrend towards the end of this particular study. And this is really some of the only longitudinal data that's available in terms of following people over time. So this is the background for why we were interested in doing the eNET study. We felt like there's still a need to try to better characterize the patterns of symptoms and identify different risk factors for high symptom burden in NENs. And then the goal here is to try to support patients throughout their illness. And down the line, we hope to use the data that's generated from eNET to identify opportunities for different interventions that might help improve quality of life for people with NENs. And the impact of NENs on a variety of aspects of quality of life has not been very well described. So I showed a little bit of the data that exists, but the impact more broadly on finances, social relationships, acceptance of illness, and other domains like sleep, memory, fertility, sexual health, there's very little that's been published about any of those things. And then also there's very little known about the impact of modifiable risk factors, lifestyle factors like diet and exercise on quality of life. And that's something we're interested in studying as well. And as I'll talk about, we're using a web-based platform. So the idea here is that this may be a new way to try to find people in the community as a way to study rare diseases like NENs, where any one center is just a little sliver of the whole population. So what is eNET? Well, it's a pilot study. So we're really learning how to use, how to do this type of research and how to use the platform. The platform we're using is called Eureka. It's web-based. I'll talk more about it in a minute. And the goal is to try to further investigate health-related quality of life in patients with many different types of neuroendocrine cancers. It's direct to participant longitudinal research. So participants are asked a series of surveys. They're all validated. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And they cover many different domains of quality of life. So it is a pretty extensive study. Symptoms, lifestyle, diet, exercise, other aspects of quality of life, fertility, medical expenses, and financial toxicity are all domains that are covered in this study. The baseline visit is far and away the longest. And so participants are asked all the surveys at baseline, and then they're followed longitudinally. There are steady visits every 6 to 12 months for a total of 3 years. And then a subset of surveys are asked at each of the follow-up time points. The study is designed to be completed on any internet-enabled device. So you can use a computer. You can also use a phone or a tablet. And you don't have to complete it all in one sitting. So by design, we intended people to be able to, fill out a couple surveys, put it down, fill out a few more, and come back. So you have 6 months actually to complete each full study visit and all the surveys for that visit. All right, so what makes this study different than some of the studies that are out there or that have already been done? The first is that we're using validated surveys. So almost all of the surveys that we've included have been validated. What does that mean? Well, it means that in the questions that are included have been vetted. So they should have sentences and questions that are well constructed. The language should be optimized to try to avoid confusion or ambiguity. And they've been tested extensively. So this ensures that the results are reliable and accurate, which means if you ask the same patient, the same survey under similar conditions, you would get similar results. So they're consistent. And they've been validated, so they're measuring actually what they're supposed to be measuring. That's part of the idea of validity. And the other nice thing is it allows for reliable comparisons of responses between different groups, and I'll talk about how we might leverage that in just a bit. All right, so why longitudinal surveys? Well, I think as most people can appreciate, the context for symptoms matters a great deal. One of the things I've heard from patients is, around the times of treatment decisions when cancer's progressing, that there's a lot of symptoms that people may have around those periods, both physical along with psychological, when changes in treatment are needed. People who may have been on a stable treatment regimen for a while may find they don't have as many symptoms during that time. And if you look just at a single time point, you may not capture the full experience of what it's like living with neuroendocrine cancers. And then changes in symptoms over time are important to fully capture the experience of living with cancer. The other nice thing about longitudinal data is it can help us start to get at questions of relationships between different variables. So by following symptoms over time, we may be able to help clarify the order of events. So we might be able to link earlier symptoms and behaviors with later symptoms or outcomes. We can explore patterns of change and then dynamics of how people move through the course of their illness. And it may start to provide some insight into causal mechanisms, which I think a single survey as a single time point, you can't really draw inferences about causation. So that's an advantage of this study and why we wanted it to be longitudinal over time. All right, so what is the Eureka platform? This is the web-based platform we're using to actually run the study and deliver the questions. It is NIH funded. It was developed at UCSF by the Department of Cardiology for another study called Healthy Heart. Healthy Heart is a huge study. They've enrolled over 300,000, both people with cardiovascular disease and a lot of normal controls. The platform allows for web and mobile-based research. All of the conduct of the study is done on the platform. So there's no direct interactions with the study personnel unless you have questions or problems with the study. So people are consented online. They fill out all the surveys online. You do need to have an email address to get reminders. The reminders are automated to, when you have a survey that's unfinished or coming up, those are delivered online. It's been user tested and sort of gamified, which means it's fairly user-friendly as you're going through the platform. And if you look at all the different studies that are using Eureka, there have been over 500,000 participants enrolled. So the bulk of those were in Healthy Heart, but now there are a bunch of different that are used to capture the experience of what it's like living with this cancer. Most of these cancers, most of them, all the surveys are asked at baseline, but the follow-up visits, many fewer surveys are asked at each follow-up visit. The vast majority of these surveys have been validated and tested, at least in cancer patients or other cancer populations, if not specifically in neuroendocrine tumors. Another nice thing is there are several other studies at UCSF that are either planned or ongoing in other disease areas. So I mentioned Healthy Heart already. There's a study called Logic that's enrolling people with other gastrointestinal cancers, looking at lifestyle and outcomes. Eat, Move, Sleep is being run by the Department of Urology and enrolling people with prostate cancer. So there will be an opportunity to, and many of the surveys that are being asked in these other studies are the same as what we're asking in our study. So there'll be an opportunity down the line to compare symptom burden and really get at the similarities and the differences between cancer types along with other chronic diseases. So I think this is an opportunity we hope to leverage. All right, so the primary goal of the study, the primary endpoint is feasibility. This is a new platform. This is a new type of research for me and Dr. Bergsland. We're learning a lot about what works and what doesn't. One of the main goals is just trying to figure out how to engage participants, learn how to conduct this type of research, and get a lot of feedback about what people like and what they don't like. We ask a separate survey that's totally separate from the platform to get feedback, and we're really taking that feedback quite seriously, as I'll talk about when I talk about how we're going to expand this. And this is meant to be iterative, so we can over time change the study, pull out different surveys, change the flow of the surveys based on feedback. And really, we're hoping to use the data from the pilot to generate hypotheses about future research and other interventions to do interventional studies down the line. And secondary, we're trying to actually look at the data. So we're trying to understand what are the unique challenges, the unique symptoms that patients with NENs experience, and try to identify what are the key areas of concern and unmet need. The current status, the study is open. It's been open for about, almost 14 months at this point. The study website is listed on this slide. We've enrolled 181 people from the planned 200 patient pilot cohort. So we're getting close, but we still have room for 19 more people to enroll. We're trying to wrap up enrollment fairly quickly because we actually want to start looking at all the baseline visit data, the data from that first study visit soon. And next steps, we're already planning for a larger study that we're tentatively calling Net Voices. We're hoping to enroll over 400 people in that study. One of the main changes we're making, though, as we move from eNET to Net Voices, is we're trying to streamline the study significantly. So we have all this data from the pilot study, which we're going to use and look at. But as we think about how to make it palatable, one of the pieces of feedback we've gotten is it's pretty long. The baseline visit takes about 3, maybe 4 hours to complete from start to finish. We're planning on cutting that by at least 50%, focusing on the surveys that seem to be the highest value for people who participated. And we're trying to just streamline the overall experience. We may set specific enrollment goals. So right now the study is open to really any primary site, any grade. That said, we're getting a lot of small bowel and pancreas, and we may set some specific recruitment goals by primary site or by grade. And then we've also found, and this is a problem with digital health studies in general, they tend to enroll more affluent, educated participants. And one of our goals as we think about expanding is being very intentional about how we might increase the diversity of people who are participating to better reflect the experience of everyone who has these cancers. All right, this is, I think, my last slide or second to last slide. This is just a snapshot tentatively of we're working on some branding for the Net Voices study, our tentative logo. We're already starting to plan ahead and make changes to the platform in anticipation of this larger study. All right, that's all I had. I definitely want to allow time for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was an excellent overview and really help us understand the history, what the study is all about and where you're going forward. I have kind of a practical question, and then I'm going to stop the recording so we can have a more open discussion. Can people enroll in both the eNET and Net Voices, or one or the other?
So we have to work out that one piece with the programmers. I know that as we're getting Net Voices up and running, we can continue enrolling in eNET. So it's not a problem if we end up enrolling slightly more than 200, for example. But we're still working with the programmers about whether someone who's been in the initial study will continue in eNET or if they'll morph into Net Voices.
Yeah. And the participants, they need to be able to commit for the 3 years of doing the survey.
Ideally, any type of research study, you can stop at any time. That's always in the consent. It's always part of what makes research ethical. You don't have to continue if you don't want to or can't. But we do, ideally, when people start, we'd like to have the intention be that you would try to continue, because we do think the longitudinal data is going to be part of what is valuable from this study compared to a lot of I think most patients are asked a ton of different survey questions as like a one-off, right? Mm-hmm. Both as part of clinical care and then also sometimes for research. So the longitudinal part is part of what makes this unique and valuable. So we would like people to at least have the intention of wanting to do.
Yeah, I agree. The longitudinal, including Dr. Halay's study, right? That was very insightful. And just to clarify, this is for patients only, or do you also want to include caregivers?
Right now, it's just for patients. That is an area we are very interested in expanding. And again, we're thinking about how we may use the data and where we can go from here. And a separate study for caregivers where the caregivers are linked with the patients is something we may want to do in the future. We are definitely interested in that. But as of right now, it's just patients only, not caregivers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your attention again to quality of life, because this is really important. I think it's important to all of us as well.